All right. So, did you know that the size of your pupils can actually give away what's going on in your head? And no, this is not just some flirting technique type thing to see if someone's interested in you, like their pupils dilate and that sort of stuff. There's actually like more to it and stuff. And where I'm getting this is from the book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Here's the cover if you need to see it. But first off, why is this important, right? So basically, by understanding what he calls your system two, like your by understanding how kind of your conscious mind and that sort of thing, that's what he calls system two in a way, and how that interacts and stuff like that. How that handles attention and effort. So, like you having to pay attention to something and actually think about it by increasing how much effort you're giving and so on. We can actually better allocate it and realize when we're overloaded and not optimally performing certain tasks, right? So, it's just kind of having an overall awareness of that, we can more or less optimize how we're doing stuff, right? So, that being said, Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winning economist, or at least, I don't know if he's an economist, but he at least won a Nobel Prize in economics. It says he's a Eugene Higgins Professor of Psychology at Princeton and some other stuff, so psychologist. But regardless, anyway, straight into the content. So basically, the thing with your pupils is the pupils are sensitive indicators of mental effort, right? And so to take a quote, from one of the experiments that he did, he said, we soon discovered that the shape of the pupil varied second by second, reflecting the changing demands of the task, right? And this kind of reflected a shape of an inverted V. So like think about like how much effort you're having to give versus the size of your pupil, right? And so think about an inverted V, it goes up like a peak, like a mountain peak, and then comes down, right? So the more effort you give, it just increases the size of your pupil to a certain point, but then it starts to decrease with the more effort you have to give, right? So the peak pupil size is basically the peak amount of like maximum effort that you're able to give. They basically found out that after that amount of point, people more or less just kind of give up because they just can't process stuff that quickly, right? And he did this one way by trying to memorize like a series of numbers and that sort of thing. He also had ones to where it was like you had like a group of 3 or 4 numbers, and then you had to do like add one. So like he had like a group of like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you would say like 2, 3, 4, 5, and adding one to each thing. You also had add 3 and so on, that sort of thing, right? He also found that in the first 5 seconds, the pupil dilates by about 50% of its original area, and the heart rate increases by about 7 beats per minute. This is as hard as people can work. Anymore, they basically just give up, right? And so that's kind of like your maximum output in a way, right? And how maximum output in terms of like cognitive ability in a way, and how that reflects physically on your body, right? So there is an increase in heart rate as well whenever you're actively trying to do something like that, especially that's kind of cognitively difficult. So he says like the life of system 2, right? So like your conscious mind is kind of a pace of a comfortable walk with episodes of jogging and on rare occasions by a frantic sprint, right? So it's kind of like a lot of the times, I mean, unless you're like actively studying something, if you're just doing it like a job that you do like pretty much every day, I mean, it's a comfortable walk. You've done this before. It's not all too new. You're kind of just going through the motions. Sometimes you run into a problem. You got to jog a little bit, think for some time. That's it. And very rarely do you have to like frantically figure something out and do something. And that's kind of more of like you're like in an emergency situation, right? To where you're frantically trying to figure something out. Like that, right? So he says when in a mental sprint, people may become effectively blind. And with that, to give an example, the gorilla experiment, I talked like where they had like people passing balls and stuff and the thing, and then a person in a gorilla costume comes in the middle, does a little dance and leaves. Talked more in depth about that on the previous video. I'll put a card or something for that, so you guys can easily get it. I'll make a note so I hopefully don't forget. At 5:15, so it's actually right there on the spot. Anyways, so also found that failures of detection, so that failure of detecting whether or not the gorilla was there in the beginning, followed the same inverted V pattern as the pupil, right? So it's kind of the same causes. Being said, system 2, he compares it to like your conscious mind again. He compares it to like electrical circuits in a house, like circuit breakers, right? And basically, because it's kind of doing the same thing, a flow of information in a way, if you think about it. So he says they both have limited capacity, but they both respond differently to overload, right? So like if a circuit gets overloaded in your house, the breaker pops, right? Cuts off the power and all that stuff. Mental overload, however, is more selective and precise, right? And so he says the system 2 protects the most important activity, whatever you're doing right now, and the spare capacity is allocated when available, right? Whether you're thinking about something in the background or whatever the case may be, right? Also found that this is dictated by skill and talent, right? So someone who's just like naturally talented and doesn't really have to think about doing this specific thing because they're just good at it. He says, as a quote, as you become skilled in a task, its demand for energy diminishes by increasing skill, right? Studies of the brain have shown that the pattern of activity associated with an action changes as skill increases with fewer brain regions involved, right? Talent has similar effects. Highly intelligent individuals need less effort to solve the same problems as indicated by both pupil size and physical exertion, like your heart rate, right? And he says system 2 is the only one to follow that, like follows rules, compares objects of several different attributes, like making a genuine comparison to make like an intelligent decision. That's all like consciously being done, right? More or less, especially on multiple different attributes. Say like buying a house in a certain area or whatever, and doing comparisons that way. And also talking about deliberate choices between options. And basically encompassing all of the stuff we've talked about thus far in the video. He basically calls it the law of least effort, right? And he says that multiple times throughout the whole 440 something pages. Or did I misspeak? Well, if you look in the appendices, yeah, roughly 400 to 450 if you want to count appendices. But basically what the law of least effort means is like people want to avoid that mental overload, right? And they do that by like dividing tasks into steps or something, or like writing stuff down. So like if you're doing the numbers thing or you're adding to each digit, you're actually writing it down so that you writing it down so you don't have to keep it in working memory, taking up space, and you can just focus on one thing at a time, right? Because doing stuff like that is exhausting, especially over significant periods of time. That's something I know like pilots specifically have to do a lot of the times, is to do multiple things at once. Like having multiple gauges simultaneously doing things, and can be difficult mentally, to say the least. At least with some of the training stuff they sometimes have you do. Anyways, that's all I have to wrap up basically. I'm put a playlist. I'm putting all of these videos I'm doing about this book and kind of the stuff I've been learning in it and trying to kind of ingrain in my own head, because I feel like it's something very important to understand. I talked about that a lot in the first video for it, which will be in the beginning of the playlist, of the general review for the book, right? So I'll put a playlist for that up in the corner. And then I want to say, what other applications can you guys think of like where like maybe not just pupil size, or maybe more specifically like heart rate, but like more examples of where this kind of attention and effort, and how that affect, like, let's say how mental attention and effort that you're giving towards something physically pops up on your body, or other things as well, right? So with that being said, I'm going to put the respective card earlier and the playlist in the corner, and hope to see you guys there.